on occasionally every once in a while on a Sunday to just have uplifting stories. And so today our speaker is going to just do that. I love his title, Kansas Isn't Pink. And also David Khachadoorian, did I say that right? David Khachadoorian, I'm going to read his bio, has had spiritual experiences through his life, the stories of which he included in books and personal stories for decades. And in 1989, if you can imagine this, at age of 18, he set out on a journey to spend a year in Europe with his bicycle. He rode 4,500 miles from Frankfurt, Germany to Istanbul, Turkey. Istanbul. He's going to share 3 stories that are before he left for Europe and the beginning of the bike tour. He was born in Southern California and he never felt at home there until he came to Alaska in 1991 to spend 5 days, and like many of us, never left. He's owned a few businesses, was married for 11 years, and has done business and personal coaching. And let me tell you, he's a person that you ask him to do something, he gets it done. So please give David Khachadoorian a nice, big Adam welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How is everybody?
Marvelous, thank you.
So, as I was growing up in Southern California, in school, I kept waiting every year in school for it to get difficult, and it never did. Usually by the middle of the year I got bored and kind of screwed off and let my grades kind of falter. In 8th grade, my to-be high school counselor came to meet me at my middle school, and I got to pick electives for the first time. And so I decided I would pick the German language, which I thought that was going to be the hardest thing. It turned out actually to be the easiest language of the 3 I could have chose from. And so,
Okay.
German's very close to English. It's a Germanic language, so it's very close. Whereas French and Spanish, which my other 2 choices, are Romantic languages, and it's a whole completely different grammar set. So German's very easy, for me at least. In any case, so I took German all 4 years of high school, and while I was studying German, I learned about Berlin and the youth hostels. And youth hostels are like these little hotels you can stay at if you're under the age of 26 years old. You can stay there really cheap. And so I got the idea somewhere in the middle of either the end of my sophomore year or the beginning of my junior year, that when I turned 18, I was going to go spend a year in Europe. I just wanted to go live life. I wanted to go travel. I wanted to go do things. And my father, this is my father, who had ridden a bicycle to work every day of his life that I can remember, kind of supported me in this. And I thought, well, I can do this. I'll work through the summer after I graduate from high school, and I'll go to Europe, and I'll spend a year. And so somewhere during my junior year, my father took me to the bicycle shop where he bought his bicycle and helped me buy all the stuff I needed to buy. He didn't pay for any of it. I had earned all the money myself, but he did, kind of introduce me to the store manager, and the store manager helped me pick out a bike and kind of plan all this stuff out. Well, this is him in June of 1988. My father and mother did not get along very well, at least not past the time I saw them. They were always fighting, and my father was very creative. My mother was very left-brained. My dad was always, if my dad wanted a lamp, he would pick stuff out of the dumpster and build a lamp out of it. He wouldn't go buy a lamp. Not just because we didn't have money, but because he was very creative. And one of the things he would do when he would take my brother and I to the park or something, he would bring his wood carvings with him. And one of the things he did was carve wood. And I've got one of them here. He had seen this knot in this piece of wood. And this piece of wood started out as a block about this big. And over the years, he carved, and it probably only took him a year, but in my mind, he was working on this for years. This rose that he carved, and the petals and things like that. So in somewhere while I was in middle school, he and my mom split up. They didn't get divorced, but he went and lived in a separate apartment. And it was at that time that I really got to know him. And I got to know him away from his marriage with my mother. And got to really see his spirit, and it really kind of shows in this picture. I mean, he was bright. He was always doing something different than everybody else. He was never along for the ride. He's Armenian, 100% Armenian. His parents came to this country from Armenia, and so he was always involved with Armenian music and dancing. He grew up speaking Armenian. It was his first language. So getting to know my father outside of the marriage with my mother gave me a whole different view of who he was. And the last day of Christmas vacation for my senior year of high school in January of '89, we had gone over to his apartment to see him. I had, and he was not answering the door. And he had not talked to anybody in a week. We didn't get to see him at Christmas time because he'd been sick. And so we got the landlord to open the door, and he was dead. He had died. It turned out he had died on his 56th birthday. And this was about 4 or 5 days later when we found him. So my whole world turned upside down at that moment because, you know, this first person I'd known that had died, and we don't want that to happen. So I was upset, but and I didn't wind up going back to school. I took another 2 weeks off, and I saw him every single night in my dream for a year. He would come see me at night in my dreams. And because of who he was, he did not want a funeral. But he told us, he had left my mom some money in a retirement account or something. I don't know where the money came from, but he had told her, you need to plan a party. That was the thing. She was to plan a party. Everybody was going to be there. It was be a big deal. Well, the only portion I had to do with this is when we were cleaning out my dad's apartment, my brother and I were looking through my dad's records. And if you're in the Armenian community, you know the name John Belazikian. He's kind of like the Jimi Hendrix of the Armenian world. He plays Armenian music, and he was really famous. And my dad used to tell me that he knew John. He knew John when John was young, and he had encouraged John to pursue his music career and do something with it. And I just assumed, okay, Dad told me that, so it must be true. So when we're planning this party, which turned out to be a memorial service first and then a party, I said to my mom, I said, well, let's have John come play. And she's like, oh, John doesn't know your dad. He's not going to, that's not a thing. And I'm like, of course he does. Dad told me it, so it's got to be true. So I called my aunt, his sister, and I said, you know, I need John's phone number. And she goes, I don't have John's phone number, and I don't know that your dad knew John. And I said, nope, Dad told me. So now you got to imagine this. I'm going through 33 1/3 records, and some of them actually 78s. I don't know if any of you remember 78s, but I am looking on the back of these records to find out where I can find John. So I'm calling record producers and record houses in Los Angeles and New York and everything, and leaving my name and phone number everywhere across the country. Well, I wish you could see the look on my mom's face the day that John Belazikian called me back. And she picked up the phone and she said, yeah, he's here. And she says, it's John Belazikian. I said, cool. I knew this was going to happen. No problem. So I picked up the phone and I said, John, you know, and he's like, yeah, of course I remember your dad. And of course I will be there. I will play for your dad at his memorial service. So that's great. So as my mom continues to plan, the first part of this story happens one night. It was already dark. I was in my room doing something in my closet, and you can see this rose right here hanging. This is my mom. This is some friends of hers. This rose hung on this wall above this bookcase. I'm in my room. When my mom and dad split up, she got to keep the rose because he had made it for her. I'm in my room cleaning the closet, and I hear my mom out in the kitchen talking on the phone. And she says, "This is great. David's dead, my father. I get to have a huge party. I get to see all my friends, and he's paying for it." And just then, our whole house shook. And we lived on a cul-de-sac, and I had thought maybe somebody had come up over the curb and ran into our house. Now, I grew up in Southern California, so earthquakes were a total normal thing. Alaska is the same thing. You guys all know what earthquakes were. This was not an earthquake. I thought somebody hit the house. So I walked out of my bedroom and into the living room here, right past this heater right here, and came out to see this rose laying face up in the living room, face up. It'd come off its hook. This is the original hook, you can see. It'd come off a flathead nail that was in the wall and was laying face up in the middle of the floor. My mom, the phone has fallen to the ground, and her mouth is just like, ah. I'm like, we didn't say another thing the whole night. I knew what happened, and I think she knew what happened. But that was in March, and we were not too far away from my dad's memorial service. So my dad's memorial service happened, and John Bill Ezekian showed up right on time, played a song for my dad, left, and if you could have seen the look on my relatives' face, they were just like, this really happened. That guy really showed up and did this, and it was me. I was 17 years old. I didn't know any better. I didn't know that there was bullshit in the world. I didn't know that people lied about who they knew, and I just assumed it was the truth, and it turned out it was. And have any of you seen that movie, Big Fish, with John August? Okay, you know at the end when all the people show up at the funeral? It was literally my Big Fish moment right there, is when this guy shows up for my dad. So I've been planning, so for 2 years I've been planning this trip to Germany. And my brother got me a poster very similar to this. I tried to find the actual poster on the internet. But it had this castle. This is actually the castle that the Disneyland castles were modeled after. And I didn't know the name of this castle. This was way before the internet. I had no way of knowing where it was or what it was. And all it said on the bottom was Germany. And I had this poster hanging on my wall the whole time as I'm planning this trip to Europe. So this was my vision of Germany. And the night of my father's memorial service, after this, some friends and I, my brother and a friend, we went bicycling up in the hills just to go blow off steam. And I had my mountain bike, and I went down a hill, and my front wheel got stuck in some dirt, and I flipped over the handlebars and injured my knee. My knee it was bad. They had to actually put me in the back of a pickup truck and take me to the hospital. And when they took me to the hospital, they x-rayed the knee, and they found that I had 3 cysts on my patella. And that kind of worried them, because when I was 5 years old, I had broken this arm, and they had found cysts, and they had done a couple of operations to get the cysts removed. So the doctor said, this is kind of unusual to have cysts on your patella at 17 years old. And so they made me go back and see the doctor that had done this surgery. And he said, well, we're going to do a bone scan. And I don't know if you're all familiar with a bone scan, but they do this. It's very weird. They take a radioactive isotope of calcium, inject it into your bloodstream, and let it kind of percolate for a few hours. And then they put you under this table, like an MRI kind of machine, and they take a picture of you. And it turns out I had cysts in almost every single bone in my body. But they said it wasn't cancer. None of them were malignant. They didn't light up like a cancer. So they said, it's just weird. We don't know, but we'd like to, operate. Oh, and this one, the one that they had fixed twice when I was 5 and 7, was cyst from elbow to shoulder. They said the whole bone was cyst. And they said, and that makes no sense, because I should be able to break your arm by just, patting you on the shoulder. They said, we really need to operate. I said, nope. I am going to Europe. This is now March of '89. I said, I'm going to Europe in August. I'm out. I'm done. I'm done with all of that. So over the next 6 weeks, packing and planning. I went back to school and was barely able to graduate, or going to be able to graduate. And one day, I started noticing bruises in places that I hadn't bumped into anything. And I didn't feel, it didn't hurt, but over a period of about a week, I was getting more and more bruises. I'm like, what is going on with this? And one morning, I was coming in and I bumped into the light switch by our door. And within a minute or two, it was like somebody had put a golf ball right under my skin. And I was like, and then it hurt. It really started to hurt. And I'm like, this is weird. Well, I let it go. I showed my mom, and she was like, that's, whatever. You'll be fine. And then the next morning, I woke up, and I went out and didn't know. And she said, what did you do to your legs? And I said, nothing. She goes, you're bruised all the way up the back of your legs. And she started looking at me, and I was bruised all the way from back of my neck all the way down. And we're like, okay. So she took me to see my pediatrician. So my pediatrician was like, we'll do a blood count. We'll do that. And he's asking me all these questions, and he can't find anything wrong with me. And he says, okay, you need to go see this specialist upstairs. Go see another specialist. And they took me up there, and they did what's called a cut test. They cut the top of your hand and see how long it takes you to stop bleeding. Because back in this day, it took a long time for a blood count to come back. So you have these things in your blood called platelets, and they're what make scabs and keep you from bleeding to death. Well, a normal person stops bleeding at the longest in 9 minutes. Well, after 22 minutes, they just said, we're going to put a Band-Aid on you and send you home. So we drove home. It took us about 15 minutes to get home. When we get home, the phone is ringing off the hook. And they're like, we need to talk to your mom. I answered the phone. I got in there first. I said, we need to talk to your mom. And you're supposed to have between 150,000 and 450,000 platelets per million blood cells. I was at 9,500. And they said, well, I don't know how you're not dead yet. So we're not quite sure, but you need to get, take him to the hospital right now. So we drove to Hoag Hospital. That's Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach. And they checked me in, and they put me on the 4th floor, which is the oncology ward, which is the cancer ward, because what they had diagnosed me with was something called thrombocytopenia, which just means you ain't got platelets like you're supposed to, and it's usually caused by leukemia. Well, I was in the 4th floor, and the first room they put me into was way off in the end, and it smelled like piss and dead people. And I told them, I said, I cannot be in here. I will not be in here. I don't care. I want to be somewhere more towards where the people are. I want to, where the hub of the thing was, because I was like off in the thing. So they put me in that room, and there was another woman in that room. And she died the next day, the woman in the room next to me. So I was alone, and at least I could see out my room. And I had friends come visit me, and everybody who knew me ever came to visit me in the hospital. I knew I was going to be okay. I knew I was leaving. I knew I was going on this trip to Europe, so I didn't really care. And then one morning, somebody was being walked with their IVs out in front of my room, and they fell over and died. Right there in front of me. Threw up on the wall and died right in front of me. I was like, Jesus Christ. So, but I was a 17-year-old kid, and I was getting to know all the nurses' names, and I knew everybody. I knew all the doctors, and they'd come take my blood at 6 o'clock in the morning, take my blood at 6 o'clock at night. And I was very overweight. I was 380 pounds at 17 years old, and they put me on a 1,000-calorie diet, and then they wanted to take me for a chest x-ray, and I stood up and passed out, and then they wouldn't let me leave my room anymore. And I had gotten down to 7,500 platelets per million. And once they determined I didn't have leukemia, they thought, well, maybe we just need to jumpstart his blood marrow so that his platelet count can get up. So they have a thing that they make out of goat's blood called gamma globulin. And they tried that, and they said, if this is going to work, this is really all that we can do for you. We're going to do this. And so they did it, and it did not work. That's when the platelets went down to 7,500 per million. So I didn't know, I didn't care. I wasn't focused on any of this stuff with them. I was just like, I'm going to be all right. And then they said, well, there's one other thing. They called some doctor in a foreign country, and there's some treatment that we could try. And I remember it was a giant white pill, and I had to sign a waiver. My mom had to sign a waiver because it wasn't FDA approved. And they tried that, and that didn't work either. And then they stuck a straw in my chest, a metal straw, to take out some bone marrow so they could send it off to some lab for a test. And they just stopped treating me. They took out the IVs. They just stopped treating me. There was nothing they could do. And I didn't really realize that they had stopped treating me. So one night in the hospital, the security guard came and closed my door. But it didn't close my door all the way, and it popped back open. And they wheeled out another body in a body bag from one of the neighboring rooms, and that's when I just lost it. And it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I just like, shit, I'm dying. This is really happening. And I freaked out, and I called my mom, and I'm dying. And she was like, honey, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. I'm so sorry. You know, there's just nothing she could do. And I hung up the phone with my mom. And this woman, who I had not seen before, now I'd been in the hospital now I'd say about 14 days at this point. I'd learned the name of everybody that was ever on the wing. I knew who came and checked on me at night. I knew who took my blood in the morning, who took my blood at night.
Okay.
And a woman I had never seen before came in, and she said, hey, your mom says you're a little upset. And I started talking to her, and she grabbed a chair, and she sat down next to my bed, and she started talking to me. She says, so, what are you going to do when you get out of the hospital? And I said, well, I'm going to graduate from high school. I'm going to go. So she got me talking about this trip I was going to take to Europe. And she asked me every single question. What have you bought so far? Do you have the bicycle? Have you done this? All this? And we talked, and the sun started to come up. And she said, I have to go. And she left. Well, my blood doctor came in to do his 9 a.m. rounds. Well, they came and took my blood. They came and took my blood at 6 a.m. after she left. My blood doctor came in to do his rounds, and he's looking at my chart, and he goes, what the hell is this? He goes, did they take your blood this morning? I said, yeah. He said, did they take your blood last night? I said, yeah. He said, well, they messed something up. This doesn't even make any sense. And he says, this doesn't make any sense because there's no way, you were at 7,500 million last night, there's no way you could be at 100,000 this morning. It's not possible to go up 100,000 platelets, and it's not possible, so they fucked something up. He was so pissed. He goes, I will do it myself. And he went and drew my blood again at 9 a.m. He went to the lab and watched them do it, and they were at 150,000 when he took it and came back. He says, well, I got no explanation for this. I find out years later that they were already planning, they were figuring I was going to be dead by Friday. That there was no way, because they had stopped treating me, there was nothing that was going to happen, they figured I was going to be dead. Well, that Friday, I actually got out of the hospital, and they let me go. So I spent the rest of that summer getting ready and buying all this stuff that you see here. This is me in the Frankfurt airport with the bicycle that I bought and all my stuff, and this was loaded with all kinds of crap.
And hair.
Yeah, I had hair. And so, I only had two plans. I had the plan to be in Frankfurt, go to Darmstadt, which is about 12 miles south of the Frankfurt airport, spend the night in Darmstadt, and be in Munich for Oktoberfest. That was the only plan I had. The rest of the year I had about a little over $9.50 a day to spend, and I figured I could do it, which worked back then. And so I started bicycling around southern Germany. I went to Munich. I spent about 3 weeks in Munich, had a great time at Oktoberfest. There's a lake that borders Germany, Austria, and Switzerland down in the corner there called Lake Constance. And this is in Lindau. I was staying in the youth hostel there. And in the room where I was at, there was a calendar with that castle on the calendar. So I was like, I asked one of the German kids that was in the youth hostel, I said, where is this castle? He goes, oh, that's not too far from here. That's just about 100 kilometers, and it's in the city of Füssen. So it turns out the castle's name is Neuschwanstein, which literally means New Swan Stone. I think it's named after the white stone it was built off of. And so I decided to ride up to this town, Kempten, which is kind of out of the way, but kind of on the way, so I could stay on the main roads. And while I was in Kempten, I'd been going into churches and things like that, and I didn't grow up with any kind of spiritual anything whatsoever. I was very, very left brain, math, science, prove it to me, physics, it's all, and a little of that dwindled out in physics class when they couldn't tell me what protons and neutrons and electrons were actually made of. Back then they didn't even know what quarks were, so I kind of lost interest in that, and I started noticing all this beautiful stuff that I saw, this artistic stuff. I got this feeling that it had to come from somewhere, that somebody had to be inspired to make this, that it wasn't, I couldn't do any of this. And so this is literally, I took this picture, I had a spiritual experience in this church, just this awakening of somebody was inspired to do this. This comes from somewhere, because I don't have any access to this. So I bicycled the rest of the way into Füssen. I think this is Bundesstraße 12. This is B12, headed towards Füssen. Fussen's kind of over here in this direction. And I felt at home as soon as I saw the Alps. I just felt like I'd been there before, and I don't know what it was. I just felt at home. And I went and stayed in the youth hostel, and then this is the back of the castle. For me, I needed to prove that I was there. For me, that castle represented Germany, and I had to prove I was there, and I wanted the quintessential picture like that was on that poster that you saw. I wanted the picture of the front of the castle. I don't know if you can see, there's kind of a big cliff in front of the castle, and there's really no place to get to the front of the castle. And I spent the first day walking all the way around this side of the castle, further around the back. I could get down below it, but I couldn't get that picture from the top where they were showing it. And I spent 2 days going around this castle trying to hike. I got lost. I was way in a valley, way over here, miles and miles, and wind up not getting back to the youth hostel until dark that night because I was gonna get this damn picture. Well, I'd spent 2 days in the youth hostel and dozens of hours walking around trying to figure out how to get up the face of that cliff and go around. And so I just went back to the youth hostel that night, and I was talking to some other kids in the youth hostel, and something really stood out. There was a short, brown-haired woman, girl, I still don't know how old she is, woman, girl that was checking into the youth hostel, and I heard her say something about mountains. I didn't know there were mountains here. I was like, why are you even here? And she went and checked in and went and sat down behind the people I was talking to, and I could see she was, writing in her journal or something. So the next morning, I was always up early for breakfast, but somehow the next morning I got up late for breakfast. And there were only 4 people left for breakfast. There was me, there was this brown-haired girl, woman, whatever she was, and another girl that I'd been talking to, and the kid who ran the youth hostel. In Germany, at least at the time, you had to do 2 years of civil service. You could either join the military, or you could go do something like run a youth hostel as part of your civilian service. And the kid who ran the youth hostel was doing civilian service, and so it was late. Breakfast was over, he brought his breakfast, and he sat down with the 3 of us. And we got to talking, and one of the other kids didn't speak German, so I was kind of translating back and forth between the kid who ran the youth hostel, and he says, you speak German? I said, yeah. He says, do you want a job? I said, I don't know if I really want to work at a youth hostel. He says, no, my parents own a hotel over in the next town, and they would need somebody for the winter if you'd be willing to do that. And I thought, well, do I really want a job? Now, my father's sister had given me a 1-month Eurail pass so that I could spend the month on the trains. It was a fantastic deal. And I knew that I would probably use that to go to the southern part of Europe because it was starting to get cold. So I figured I'd, do that and get to the southern part of Europe with my bicycle. So I knew at some time I had to activate this 1-month Eurail pass. And I said, yeah, I don't know, maybe. We'll see. I was thinking of going to Greece for the winter. And he said, well, listen, just go see my parents tonight at 5 o'clock. Be at this hotel. It's 13 kilometers in this other direction. And I was like, okay, whatever. I was on vacation, so I didn't know if I really wanted a job. And I said, what I really am trying to do today is get the pictures from the front of the castle. And he says, what do you mean? I said, I want to be able to take a picture of the front of the castle. He says, I said, like it's in the postcards and stuff. And he said, I know it's help. But the little girl, the woman, whatever, with the short brown hair said, I'll show you where it is. And I'm thinking to myself, aren't you the one that didn't know there were mountains here last night? So she says, yeah, I'll go with you. So she goes and rents a bicycle at the train station and goes with me on the bicycle to the castle. And we went and did a tour on the castle, and she said, okay, let's go get those pictures now. And then I took over again. I said, oh, well, here, we'll go this way. And she's like, okay. And you could just see she just let go of everything. She's like, all right, whatever, you do whatever. And we went, and there's a gorge right here. It's 200-foot gorge down here, and there was a early snowstorm that had fallen up in the mountains, and that thing was rushing with really cold water. And I'm like, we got to cross here, and she's like, okay. And I help her cross, and she falls in the water, and I pull her out, and she goes, are you ready for me to show you now? And I said, sure, whatever, And she just went into like this little, I don't want to call it a trance, but it was just like she probably just took a deep breath, and she said, it's this way. And she leads me around, and I could see we were getting closer when we come around this side, but there's this cliff. I mean, to get above this, you got to go up this shit. And I'm like, there's no way we can get there. And she goes, just follow me, come around this way. And she takes me around. This is just a maybe 40 or 50 seconds before we come around, and there's a cable hanging out of the sky on the back side of this cliff, and it's kind of like climbable. And so I was like, okay. And she's like, we're going to climb this. Now, I was a little bit lighter than I was in that first picture. I'd probably lost maybe 50 pounds in the 2 months that I'd been bicycling. This is just a few days before Halloween now. I've been in Europe now about 2 months. And I don't know. I still to this day, I don't think to this day I could probably climb that cable again. I don't know. But we climbed it and came up across a clearing and come out in the front, and there it is. There's the castle. And that's exactly where all the postcards are shot from that spot. We sat there. She instantly started meditating. I was just happy to be there. And then this butterfly came and landed on my hand, and was on my hand and my arm, and spent the whole time with me. And so much that I was able to take a picture of it. And it hung out with us for about an hour or so. We ate her lunch, because I hadn't packed any lunch. And I'd actually forgotten extra film. I only had like 3 shots. So that picture of that castle is one of like 3 shots I have. Anyway, she said, you need to get to that job interview. I was like, I didn't care. I mean, I just checked off a huge bucket list item. I saw the castle, I had the pictures of the front of it. I didn't really care. Well, we start climbing back down that cable, and she's ahead of me. And at some point, my camera bag slipped out of my hand and fell the rest of the way. And I yelled for her to catch it. And I could hear glass breaking and all this stuff. I thought I heard glass breaking. We finally get to the bottom of the cable, and she goes, I don't know where it is, David. It went that way. And we went back out to where this picture was taken, further down here, and sitting on a ledge above that 200-foot gorge, there's one rock, and it's completely smooth. And it's not even in the center of where it would naturally fall to. It was not in the fall line, but the camera bag was sitting right there. And I opened it up figuring I was just going to find a pile of broken glass and plastic. And what I had heard was a bunch of coins that I had found at Oktoberfest was all just in that camera bag. My passport was in there, my return plane ticket, all my stuff was in that camera bag. And it was everything. The only thing that was broken was a lens filter case. It's the only thing that broke. She said, come on, you've got to get to that job interview. Like she knew. So we went back to the youth hostel, and by the time I got to the youth hostel, it was like 6 o'clock. And I'm already an hour late for the interview. And so I get on my bicycle. I go to the train station to find out where this place is, and they said, oh, that's 13 kilometers this way, you got to get on this road. And so I start bicycling, and it gets dark. And a cop pulls over. And the police in Germany are no shit. They are the real deal. And he's like, the rule says you have to have a front and a back light, and you do not have a back light, so you may not ride on the German roads when the sun is down. It's like, okay, whatever, dude. So I get off my bike, start walking, he drives away, and then he comes back twice to check on me to make sure I was still walking. By the time I get to the next town, it is 8 o'clock at night. I'm 3 hours late for my interview. I get off the main road, and then I start riding my bicycle again. I get over to find this hotel, which I didn't even really know the name of, and I get in. I put my stuff by the bar. I go talk to the kid and his dad. They asked me one question: do you speak German? I said yes, and that was it. I was hired. They gave me a night in the hotel room. They fed me a gourmet meal in the kitchen. The next day, they fed me breakfast. They had me go work with the maids because I was going to be a maid for the thing, and then they decided I was going to wash dishes eventually. By 2 o'clock, I was done working for the day. They said, you're hired. We need you back here, December 1st, because that's when our season starts. And I said, well, listen, I'm kind of bicycling through Europe, and can I just leave my bicycle here? I'll go get my stuff at the youth hostel, leave my bicycle here, and then I'll go spend a month on the trains. How much time do I have? Because I might add an extra story. Okay, I'm going to add an extra story today. Okay, so
Don't stop.
So I said, okay, I'll be back tomorrow. I'm just going to go spend the night at the youth hostel tonight, bring my stuff back tomorrow, and then I'll go get on the trains. They said, okay, great, fine, wonderful, we'll see you in December. And so I bicycled back to the youth hostel, and the youth hostel's empty. Now, this was very weird for that youth hostel to be empty. I mean, there was nobody in there. It was just me. I was back there, and I was putting my stuff away, and I hear a shower going up on the girls' side of the dorm. And so I really wanted to see, that's her real name. In the book, she has a different name. She asked me to change her name. Lily, yeah, her name in the book is Lily. So I go to the girls' side of the dorm. I hear the shower running, and I said,
Lily.
she says, David, is that you? I'm in the shower. I'll be out in just a little bit. So she was Australian, and she had been working in London, and she just, out of the blue, just decided to quit her job and go traveling. She'd been traveling through Thailand and all these different places and just randomly going places, and that's how she wound up there. And she said, David, you're not going to believe this. The other day when last night when we got back from the castle, I drew this picture, and I really want to show it to you. I said, okay. So she brings out this art book, and she starts showing me her artwork, and this is the first picture she showed me. She said, this is, I named this book, Dancing in the Light. And I thought, for me, it just felt really good. It was a beautiful thing, and she dated it the 27th of October, '89 in Füssen, Bavaria, at Ludwig's Castle, Dancing in the Light, and that's her signature there on the bottom. And so when I saw this, I said, oh, you know, that's beautiful. I really, you know, that's amazing. And I started looking through her book, and her artwork was, I mean, it was otherworldly. It was like talking to me. It told me things like, from stories of her life, I was like, is this when you got robbed? And she goes, no, but I drew that the day I got robbed. And so I got to kind of go back a little bit here. So my mother used to joke and call my father the Grinch when he, around Christmas time, because he'd get worried about money and stuff. And so it was just like kind of a big joke. And when my brother and I were cleaning out my dad's apartment, he had left this tape in a tape player with, you know, about how sad he was because he couldn't see his kids for Christmas, and what Christmas is this, what Christmas is this, and he kept repeating it over and over and over and over again on this tape, and it was like a 90-minute tape. We flipped it over, he's still repeating, what Christmas, what Christmas, what the hell is that? So we, you know, threw it on the pile of junk and went on. So as I'm looking through this giant book of artwork, I get to the last picture in her book, and I realize that she has drawn a picture of my father. And I said, when did you draw this? And she said, oh, the night I got to the youth hostel. I said, the night that you didn't know there were mountains when you were sitting behind me, you were drawing this? She said, yeah, that must have been about it. So a couple of things. So first of all, my dad's sitting in a sleigh. It's very Christmas themed. There's one reindeer, just like the Grinch. I don't know if you've seen the Grinch that Stole Christmas. A couple of things about this. There's regular stars in the sky, but on him, they're all the Star of David, which was his name and my name. My dad did not have that little thing, but he definitely did have the goatee and the big pores on his nose. He had a caftan just like this with these big cuffs. When we cremated him, his ashes were put in a jewelry box that his father had made, and those are the carvings from the top of the jewelry box. Can't make this shit up. And I told her the story about this and about the What Christmas thing, and so she titled the picture What Christmas. That was, so for a long time I had forgotten that. I thought she had actually done that, but years later after I wrote the book, she moved back to Australia, she read the book, and she called me back and said, hey, I just want you to take my name out of the book. I don't want my name in the book. I said, okay, that's fine. She goes, but I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to fucking believe. She said, I was doing some research about this picture, and she said, do you know that cross is the Armenian cross? I said, no, I did not know that. We didn't find that out until 2011, that that was the Armenian cross. So, anyway, her name is, she's an illustrator of children's books. I just can't put it in the book. I can tell anybody I want the truth.
Put it on the internet.
Well, whatever. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to add a little bit extra to this because we got a few minutes, right? All right, so you can see this. She drew it on the 26th of October, '89. So I told her, I said, she goes, you know, this kind of happens to me sometimes. Sometimes I draw pictures of people and I meet them the next day. She goes, this just kind of, I go into a trance and I start drawing. I said, okay. So I asked her if I could take a picture of it, and I took a picture of it, and I took a picture of the other one that she took. So the next day, she left to go some other country. I don't know. We kept it. I got her mailing address, and we were going to keep in touch or whatever. So I decided to go get on the train. So I got on the train first. I went to Salzburg. I went to Vienna. I went to Budapest. And I was just sleeping on the trains at night for the most part. Just sleep on the train at night. And so then I took the train from Budapest, Hungary to Paris, the Oriental Express, got to Paris. It was a Sunday morning or something, I can't remember. I couldn't change money, I had nowhere to go, so I just got on another train and spent the day going to Zurich. And I got to Zurich, and Zurich was freaking expensive. I had spent like 3 or 4 days of my budget just getting breakfast and taking a tour of the city on a bus. So I'd left my bags, I'd taken the bags off my bicycle and was using them like a backpack, and I had left them at the train station, so I decided, I said, I gotta get out of Zurich, it's too expensive. I'm gonna go spend the night in the youth hostel, and So the night of November 6th, 1989, I walked into the Zurich train station, and as I'm getting my bags out of the locker, I see there's an overnight train going to West Berlin. And I thought to myself, oh, I met those guys in Munich that live in West Berlin. I'll just take the overnight train to West Berlin. I'll sleep on the train. That way I don't have to pay for a youth hostel tonight. Get on the train to West Berlin. Well, my rail pass was good for Western trains, and I did not, in my logical brain, remember that, you know, when you cross in, just because you got on the train here, you pay the fare as you go through the country. So when we were driving through East Germany to get West Berlin, when the train was going through there, my rail pass wasn't good. And they woke me up in the middle of the night asking me for my ticket, and I didn't have a ticket. I showed them my rail pass. He said, you know, that's not good. And I wound up having to pay something like 87 German marks, which at the time was about $43 yeah, that's like 4.5 days of my budget. Well, if I had been awake and in my left brain mind, I would have just got off the train. But I didn't. I just somehow had a 100-mark note, and I paid it and went in. So I got to West Berlin the morning of November 7th, 1989. You're already ahead of me, I think, aren't you? Yes. All right, November 7th, 1989, and I went to the youth hostel, and I called Thomas and Frank, these guys I met in Munich at Oktoberfest, and let me do something real quick here. I called them and went and hung out with them, and I'm like, I want to go to East Berlin, because you could do that. You could, you know, pay some money and go into East Berlin. I wanted to, you know, see the East Bloc country. And they said that they couldn't join me, and so the morning of the 9th, I hooked up with some Australian kids, and we went into East Berlin, and East Berlin was not amazing. It was very drab, and it's everything you've heard about the East. If you've not been to an Eastern Bloc country, just trying to get in. Okay, we'll get there in a second. So I spent the last day going through East Berlin. Thomas and Frank said, meet us at this bar in West Berlin tonight at 5 o'clock. So me and this Australian kid go through East Berlin. We're coming out of East Berlin, and I was in a really interesting place in my life, because I was just having some kind of awakenings. And this statue, I think, is in East Berlin. One of these is Lenin, one is Marx. I'm not sure who's who. But I just said, I want a picture with that statue for some reason. When I climbed up on the statue, this thought, I promise you this is the thought that came through me, was these guys, even though they're the evil constructors of communism, in my mind I had this thought that they were just doing the best they could do. They thought that they were doing the right thing, probably, and I don't know what made me do this, but I kissed, and the Australian kid snapped a picture of me doing it. So I go to this bar at 5 o'clock. I meet Thomas and Frank, and we're sitting there drinking, and it's loud and noisy, and all of a sudden I spoke German, but not well enough to understand it when they were talking really fast on the radio. And somebody said something really fast on the radio, and the whole bar got quiet, and then it erupted. Well, I looked at Thomas, I said, what was that? He said, they opened the wall. The wall's open. I said, like the Berlin Wall? He says, yeah, they're letting people over right now. So we went outside, and so I found this out years later. In August of that year, in August of '88, the government, the East German government, was under a lot of pressure from a lot of sources. But what was happening is the country of Hungary borders Austria, and Hungary was kind of like this half socialist, half Western country. It was kind of in the middle. But they had a relationship with East Germany, so people would leave East Germany to go to Hungary on vacation. Well, in August of '88, the Austrian government started letting people just cross into the West. And so people were defecting left and right from the East through Hungary into Austria. Well, there came under so much pressure that night, and I found out years later that they just made the decision because there's nothing they could do. So so that night, they just started letting people over, and it was a huge party. I happened to be there at the right time. This is champagne on the wall. This is the wall itself. The West German government showed up and was handing out maps to the East Berliners coming over, handing out money to these people, and it was just a giant party. And I was just there for it, and I had been learning about this for years, and it was gone in a day. I was literally in Berlin the last day that the wall was even a thing. Wow. And this is the morning of November 10th. I'm just going to run through. This is the night of November 10th. This guy over here, this is Frank. This is at Brandenburger Gate, Brandenburger Tor. And this is on the wall. This is, attention, you are now leaving West Berlin. This is looking in. This is standing on the wall, looking into East Berlin. Somebody had gone down and put a rose there. The East German Guards. Literally, no exaggeration, 24 hours ago, you'd have been shot for standing on the wall. No exaggeration at all. This is me in the white shirt on the wall.
Oh my God.
This is me with Frank's girlfriend on the wall. So I spent people started chipping away at the wall that night. It was already getting knocked down.
This is so amazing. It brings tears to my eyes.
I'm glad.
I mean, really, because we all remember this moment in time. And you were there?
Yeah, I was there. I have a shirt somewhere.
Goodness.
I have a shirt somewhere that says Ich war dabei, and it's a picture of the wall, and it says it basically says I was there. So these are all pictures. This is Checkpoint Charlie. Berlin was separated at the end of World War II. Berlin was separated into 4 parts. There was the western side, which was shared with the U.S., French, and the U.S., French, and the British controlled the western side, and the eastern side was, controlled by the East Germans. And there were certain places that you could cross over, called checkpoints. This is the Kuhfelsendamm, which is, if you can imagine, if you took from Muldoon to probably not quite, you know what I'm talking about? So from Muldoon to Minnesota, if you declared that foot traffic only, it's not as long as that, but it's close, but it's about that wide, and said no cars can drive on Minnesota or Benson, and you just made that whole area a shopping area. This was called the Kuhfelsendamm, and I don't know if you can see, but I'm standing at one edge of it, and this was for miles. For as long as you could see left and right, there was just people. I mean, some people were just coming to buy oranges because they couldn't buy oranges in the East. But you could just see it was just, I mean, it was a huge party for a whole week. Beer companies were coming out and giving free beer to people. It was the hugest outpouring of love. It was amazing.
Viva la revolution.
Yeah, it was. The whole world changed. I'm trying to get to, see if we can get.
Wow.
The little trolleys, yeah.
Did you get a piece of the wall?
Hell no. I didn't want any of that shit. That's so negative stuff I didn't want to carry anything with that much negative energy in it. So this is the newspaper, the morning of the 10th. It says, "The wall is gone. Berlin is once again Berlin." So anyway, I think that's my time.
I'm sure we will have some comments.
Oh, thank you.
Does anyone have some
What
comments or
was the pink? Something about pink was in your.
Kansas?
Okay, so the name of the book. Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Where did
Okay,
the pink come from?
Yeah, so these stories come from my first book. My first book is called Kansas Isn't Pink. And the reason it's called Kansas Isn't Pink is when I was in grade school, there was a map of the United States painted on the blacktop in our playground. And I tried to find a reason why each state was its own color. Alaska was white. I figured that's because that's where the snow was. California was yellow. I figured that's because we had all the sunshine. Orange, Florida was orange. It really was. I figured that's where orange juice comes from. That's why it's orange. And then I saw like some of the states were pink. I was like, Kansas is pink. And I remember Kansas being pink. So that's taking an assumption as a kid and thinking, you know, that's how life is. That's what it is. But what happened in this year that I spent bicycling from Frankfurt, Germany to Istanbul, Turkey, I realized Kansas isn't pink. That's the story.
I live in Kansas, and when
Okay.
the sun is setting, it's about this big instead of this big, and it is kind of pink.
Well, there you go. And if you read the book, you realize sometimes Kansas is pink.
That's fuchsia. What's that picture?
So this is a really short story. So when I was in algebra in high school, there was a picture of this, but it actually looked more like this. Anyway, there's a picture of this head kind of like in the moonlight and on the front of my algebra book. And I thought it was some computer-generated graphic. I did not know it was real. I wound up bicycling, this is me, I wound up bicycling to Istanbul, Turkey. And in Istanbul, my grandfather was born in Malatya, which used to be Armenia. And so I thought, that'll be a great end of this trip. I'll go to Malatya where my grandfather was born. So I took a bus into Malatya. And I was trying to find old Christian churches or something because the Armenians are Christian, the Turkish they're not. And I'm in this tourist office, and I'm talking to this guy about where I can find, you know, old Christian, old Armenian churches or something. And I see a picture of this head on the wall. No, that's not true. That's not true. A kid from London walked up the stairs into the tourist office, and I'm like, what's a white kid doing here? And I'm like, what do you, he says, well, I'm here to see Nevertage. I says, what's Nevertage? And he points to a poster on the back of the wall. He goes, that's Nevertage. I go, that's here? He says, well, no, it's a 6-hour van ride up into the hills. And that's where I'm headed. So, and I just didn't even know it was real. This has been on the cover of my math book. Didn't know it was real. And I was so fascinated. So for like, I don't know, for like $30, you could take this 6-hour van ride, spend the night in a hotel, see it at sunset, see it again at sunrise. And it was a beautiful ending to the book, to see something that I didn't even know was real. So that's the Kansas in pink, and this is Nevertage. That's that answer. So what other questions? You have a question. Yes, miss.
So after,
She's read the book, so I don't know what's coming here.
well, I'm just curious, like with the stories and the way that, you know, you group your stories together is because they all tend to go together. So after you got the picture of your dad from Lily,
Yeah.
and you had this amazing year of this awakening, how was it, or how long was it between that time when you realized that the time that you spent in the hospital, right, when you were almost dying, and then you had that freak out that you were dying, that as you're literally putting the phone down, all of a sudden a woman that you've never met walks into the room saying that your mom called, which is not possible. And if
You're right, it's not.
And
What do you think about that
so,
shit?
And
Oh, I
on
just got
top of that,
chills.
if you're a worker at a hospital, there's no way, okay, that
Well, that's why that part of the
a
story is
nurse
called
or
Angel.
anybody can literally
Spend the
sit
whole
down
time.
and spend 5 hours with the kids building
Yeah.
up. So how long did it maybe occur before when you realized that was probably
Well, I
an
was this
angel
years old.
or some sort of magic being
I think
that
when
brought your spirit
when
back
I
to the
started
trip?
writing the book,
Really?
when I started writing the book in 2017, when I started assembling it, I had always known that something weird had happened there. And as I did more research, that's when I knew, because I was a horny 17-year-old boy. I knew the name of every woman that was on that floor. I knew them all. I knew when they
Right.
worked, when they were coming. I knew, and I had never seen her before. So I don't, that's a good question. I don't have a great answer for that.
Because then you had that great awakening, and so I was wondering if it ever occurred to you that that was,
I
could
don't
have
know.
even been spirit for your dad to be there because he was so part of planning your trip, and
It's-
that's what.
It's all a
then
great
he
question.
showed
I
up.
don't have an answer for you. Sorry.
So is an apparition possible? Okay,
Maybe
so
it's possible.
I had an apparition while you were telling the story.
Okay.
And you didn't mention this during the story at all. The apparition was that lady that came to you was one sent from Mother Earth, was one of your mother's from the last life. Whenever you picked up that condition,
Thrombocytopenia, yeah.
yeah, when you picked that condition up, that was a karmic signature thing. And that woman came and healed you.
That's what I believe today. But her getting me thinking about that trip and everything, that was what made the,
Totally, yes, auto-suggestion and changed your whole timeline. And she jumped in on a timeline and came and healed you.
I'll take that.
So you guys, let's give David a big hand.
Very captivating. We could listen to David for a